What if I told you that Paris, the most photographed city in the world, hides things that no travel guide will tell you? Behind the golden lights of the Eiffel Tower and the charming cafes, there is a layer of curiosities that do not appear on postcards. We are talking about an entire city underground, strange laws that sound like a joke, and social customs that confuse any unsuspecting visitor. Beneath the elegant avenues of Paris, there is a labyrinth with more than 300 kilometers of tunnels, but only a small part is open to the public. The catacombs hold the remains of more than 6 million people, arranged as if they were decorative walls. It is not an urban legend, it is an urban solution. When cemeteries became overcrowded in the 18th century, the city simply moved its dead underground. The curious part is that many people visit Paris without realizing they are walking over a parallel city. There are clandestine entrances, explorers called cataphiles, and forbidden areas that look like a post-apocalyptic movie set. This coexistence between romance and bones reveals something deeper about Paris. It does not erase the past, it reorganizes it. And that explains other decisions that seem, at the very least, unexpected. Paris was one of the first major capitals to turn its own sewage system into a tourist attraction. In the 19th century, while other cities hid their underground tunnels, here they became a symbol of modern engineering. Today, it is possible to visit part of the system at the Musée des Égouts. Strange, maybe, but it says a lot about how the city deals with what would normally be considered dirty or invisible. There is a psychological phenomenon called Paris syndrome, identified mainly in Japanese tourists who arrive in the city expecting cinematic romance and instead find haste, formality, and a certain urban coldness. It is not a myth. Parisian hospitals have recorded cases of visitors who experienced anxiety attacks, disorientation, and even psychosomatic symptoms when confronted with the difference between fantasy and reality. Metro Line 3 bis in Paris is so short and lightly used that many residents almost forget it exists. There are only 4 stations in regular operation, but there are ghost stations scattered across the city, deactivated platforms, and tunnels that were never used as originally planned. Some served as shelters during World War II, others simply remained in administrative limbo. Few people notice, but Paris is divided into 20 arrondissements, organized in a spiral, like a snail shell. Each one has its own town hall, social identity, and economic dynamics. For those who live there, saying I am from the 11th or I live in the 16th carries more meaning than simply stating that they live in Paris. It is almost like crossing invisible micro-borders at every block. This division creates very distinct cultural bubbles. There are neighborhoods where luxury is the rule, others where artistic life pulses, and regions where diversity is the main strength. For the tourist, everything seems like Paris. For the resident, it does not. And this logic of internal territories helps explain why certain social rules vary so much, including the way people interact in public. Paris is sold as a synonym for elegance, but urban reality includes frequent garbage collection strikes, historic graffiti, and periods when accumulated bags on sidewalks become part of the scenery. It is not collapse, it is political expression. At many moments, exposed trash becomes a visible symbol of disputes between unions and the government. Impeccable aesthetics coexist with this raw layer. For the unsuspecting visitor, it sounds like neglect. For the Parisian, it is social language. The strike is not an exception. It is a culturally legitimized tool. Conflict is part of the French democratic machinery. And understanding this tolerance for temporary chaos helps decode another local characteristic. The idea that certain prohibitions exist not to control individuals, but to preserve symbols. It may sound like an internet joke, but there is an old rule in France that prohibits naming a pig Napoleon. The origin is historical and symbolic, protecting the image of a figure considered national heritage. Even if it is rarely enforced today, the existence of the rule reveals something important about how the French state preserves its icons. There is a small French commune called Sarre-Pourenx, where technically dying can be considered illegal, at least without having previously purchased a burial plot in the local cemetery. The measure was created as an administrative protest when space for burials ran out and the town hall was prevented from expanding the land. It is not exactly Paris, but it reveals something about the French legal spirit. In France, and this directly impacts Paris, the work week is strictly regulated. The famous 35-hour week is not a cultural myth, it is public policy. Companies can face penalties if they exceed certain limits without formal compensation. There is even the right to disconnect, which protects employees from responding to emails outside working hours. For those coming from cultures where working late is a sign of dedication, this sounds almost like institutionalized rebellion. But here the mechanism is different, preserving quality of life as a collective value. Work should not invade personal space, and this strict separation explains something many foreigners mistake for coldness, including during lunch hours. It may seem exaggerated, but the use of ketchup in French schools has already been officially restricted. The measure emerged to protect traditional cuisine and encourage children to appreciate the natural taste of food. Instead of covering everything with industrialized sauce, the proposal is to educate the palate from an early age, and this is taken seriously. Many people do not know, but the nighttime lighting of the Eiffel Tower is copyrighted. The structure itself is in the public domain, but the light show created in the 1980s is considered a protected artistic work. This means that technically, commercial photos of the illuminated tower require authorization. For the average tourist, nothing happens. For professional use, the rule exists. This distinction reveals a French obsession with intellectual property and symbolic preservation. It is not about preventing selfies, it is about controlling the economic exploitation of the image. In Paris, even light has an owner. And when you understand that the city protects its icons with this level of legal detail, other seemingly exaggerated rules begin to make more sense. In France, toys with an excessively frightening appearance, or that do not represent recognizable human forms, have already faced regulatory restrictions. The justification involves child psychological protection and cultural safety standards. It is not that aliens are prohibited in themselves, but the representation must respect specific criteria. What seems like exaggeration is, in fact, an extension of French protective logic. In France, there is a legal provision called posthumous marriage. It allows a person to officially marry someone who has passed away, provided there is proof of mutual intent before death and presidential authorization. It is not common, but it is real, and it has been applied in specific cases. The law emerged after a tragedy in the 1950s as a way of recognizing interrupted bonds. In Paris, scheduling a business meeting during lunch can be interpreted as a lack of cultural sensitivity. Lunchtime is almost sacred. It is not just a break to eat, it is a social ritual. Even in corporate environments, lunch usually lasts longer and involves conversation that does not revolve exclusively around work. If you have ever walked through Paris expecting that automatic courtesy smile, you probably felt a slight shock. Unlike cultures where smiling at strangers is basic politeness, their facial neutrality is the norm. It is not unfriendliness, it is social reserve. Demonstrating intimacy without context can be interpreted as an invasion of personal space. In Paris, a strike is not a rare event. It is a historical tool of negotiation. Transportation stops, schools close, collection is delayed, and the city continues functioning at a different pace. For visitors, it looks like chronic disorganization. For the French, it is a constitutional right exercised publicly. The stoppage becomes a collective message, not a collapse. For many visitors, the first surprise happens early in the morning, strong cheese at breakfast. It is not an exaggeration. On many Parisian tables, especially in traditional hotels or local homes, cheeses with a strong odor appear alongside fresh bread. What sounds inappropriate for the time of day to some is, there, a natural extension of gastronomic culture. It may sound like an urban legend, but until the second half of the 20th century, it was relatively common for French children to consume small amounts of wine diluted in water during meals. Not as encouragement of alcohol, but as part of a food tradition, where wine was seen as a natural extension of the table. On many French beaches, and also in some public swimming pools, female toplessness has never been treated as a moral scandal. In Paris, although there is no ocean beach, this normalization of the body is part of a broader cultural mindset. Partial nudity is not automatically sexualized. It is seen as a personal choice within a socially accepted context. In Paris, closing a deal rarely begins in a cold meeting room. Many decisive conversations happen in cafes, between espresso and croissants. The informal environment does not reduce seriousness. On the contrary, it functions as a social filter. Before discussing numbers, it is necessary to test compatibility, style, posture. If you walk through any arrondissement of Paris, you will notice luminous green crosses flashing on practically every corner. Pharmacies are extremely numerous, and the relationship of the French with medication is intense. Painkillers, vitamins, homeopathic solutions, everything is taken seriously, with detailed advice from the pharmacist. Paris is not contradictory. It is coherent within a code that was not made for visitors. The catacombs, the symbolic laws, the untouchable lunch, the recurring strike, the reserved smile, everything follows the same logic: preserving identity, protecting symbols, and maintaining clear boundaries between public and private. The tourist's mistake is not being unaware of the monuments. It is not noticing the behaviors. The next time you travel, to Paris or anywhere else, observe less what is photographed and more what is repeated. If this video made you see Paris in a different way, subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments, which of these strange things did you have no idea existed?